If you don't know what VUCA is, then you need to pay attention. In this episode, I'm going to give you the definition of VUCA and then share 4 principles to know how to lead in a VUCA world. Welcome to Business Leaders Coach, where we educate, enable, equip, and empower you to become the best leader you can be. My name is Toyo Shimbi, founder of Business Leaders Coach, and we work with CEOs and leadership teams moving from startup to scale up. And on this podcast, I bring you practical steps that you can apply in your leadership today. We draw wisdom from some of the best business books, bring on guests, entrepreneurs, and authors as well. And you can go to businessleaderscoach.com/podcast to subscribe, where we can send you episodes and also templates and tools that come with subsequent episodes. I was training a group of leaders a few weeks ago at the time of this recording, and I asked if they had heard of VUCA. And I was a bit surprised that they had not heard of the concept. And then a few days ago, I was speaking to another director and asked if he had heard of VUCA, and he shook his head. And then I realized that, well, I only heard about this concept in 2018. So today I'm going to explain what VUCA is, if you haven't heard of that term, and explain why it's absolutely important for you to understand what this is, and hope it will help you to understand what we're going through all over the world. So I was putting a training module together for a program to help female leaders in this organization that I was working with. And in my research, I came across this term VUCA. And ever since, I began to see this evolve and just is reinforced this understanding of the world that we are now in. And so I am convinced that this is the definition of our world today. It's going to help you understand all what we're going through. And so, as I said in this episode, I'm going to answer the question, what is VUCA? And then I'm going to give you a good overview of what each word, what it stands for. And then I'm going to share the antidote, the counter of VUCA, so you can have something to apply of how to lead in a VUCA world today. So let's start off with, what is VUCA? Well, it's actually it's an acronym, so each letter stands for something. It was introduced by the US Army, the War College, to describe the world that we are now in, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so it was termed towards the end of the Cold War, and the acronym itself wasn't created. Initially, it was almost like different definitions were used, but in the late 90s, it then became the term, especially after the 9/11 terrorist attack. And so VUCA has now been the way to describe our current world. And subsequently, a lot of business leaders and strategists have now used this acronym to describe the chaotic, turbulent, and rapidly changing events in our world. And it has become what's called the new normal, which means that this is how the world is going to unfold. So you could imagine in 2018, after doing this research, I was quite shocked, and I also asked many people if they had heard of this term, and many people hadn't. And so I've been talking about it since. And if you go back to some podcasts, I would have mentioned this already. But it is simply describing the new normal. And in a way, coming out of COVID, we sort of think that that's the term that's come out of COVID. But when we look back, we think about 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. For those of us in the UK and Europe, there's the Brexit. Obviously, after that is COVID-19. And you can even think about now, at the time of this recording, with the Russia and Ukraine war, it's almost like as soon as you're coming out of one thing, there's another thing just around the corner. And it reinforces this idea that we are certainly living in a VUCA world. And so leadership is now impacted. So any leader that doesn't understand that this is now the way it is will really find it frustrating. In fact, some HR managers, they did a research. From their report, the research stated that leaders are incapable of meeting the challenges. And they said 40% of leaders, just cannot deal with the volatility, 30% with the uncertainty, 50% of the leaders described they just can't deal with the complexity, and 40% said that they just can't deal with the ambiguity. Those are some stats that was given by the HR professionals. And so this is just the way we have to understand how the world is working. And it's not only in these type of economic situations, there's also technological changes, the rapid changes that is emerging from the technological world, with whether it's Bitcoin or whatever it is, the social media explosion, population growth, people moving from one place to the next, all these complexities, and global warming as well. There are many, many things that are constituting towards this complexity and ambiguity. And so it's simply calling for a different kind of leadership in the world that we are in today. And these 4 words, I'm going to go into them a bit to give you a bit more of an understanding, and then I'll then give you the antidote or the counter, and that's sort of the beginning. There's a lot more behind it, but this hopefully can give you a framework that you can start to assess yourself. How am I doing in this area? So let's go. So let's define it. We've given the overall definition, but let's now go into each one. So the V, as I've mentioned, it stands for volatility, that we are now, the world is volatile, right? It means that the nature, it means the speed, it means the volume, the magnitude of change. It's turbulent, and that's sort of the normality. It's the frequency of that volatility is not stable. When you look back in time, for those of you that are old enough, you would know that the 90s, the 80s, things can last a lot longer. Your 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan, you could predict that this was going to last for some time. Now you can't. And even right now, I think at the time of this recording, it reinforces that. It reinforces the fact that, well, you can only really now start to have 90-day plans. And even with that, you have to have some flexibility around it. And so understanding that this world is volatile is important. And so the next word is uncertain. So the U stands for uncertainty. Yeah, so it's that lack of predictability in issues and events. These volatile times, they make it difficult for leaders to use past issues and events as predictors of future outcomes. And so it makes it more difficult for forecasting extremely difficult situations, and also even when it comes to making decisions. So that's the U, it's uncertain. The C stands for complexity, and this is simply highlighting that the problems, the challenges, they're coming from different places. The causes of these problems are complex. They're not just surface level, they're root issues, and it's very difficult due to these complexities, due to these turbulence, to really identify what the real cause is. And so it becomes a complex situation, and that also doesn't make it easy for leaders to make clear decisions, to be able to deal with it. In fact, it causes more confusion. As you're making a decision, something else is then shifting that. And if I was to think about just coming out of COVID, now there's, this whole Ukraine war, just difficult things. And as you're making these decisions, you have to be keeping your eye on all the other areas. And that's what makes it complex. And then the A is ambiguity. This is the lack of clarity about the meaning of an event. It also means that you are not clear on if this is the right direction. And you have to begin to understand that the direction that you're going perhaps might be for a short amount of time before you move to something else. And so you can see that these four words, the whole volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, they just simply give us words that describe the world that we're in today. But obviously, that's not what we want to focus on. The solution to the VUCA challenge is something called VUCA Prime. And this was developed by Bob Johansen, who was is a distinguished fellow at the Institute for the Future. And he also has written a number of books: Leaders Make the Future, The 10 Leadership Skills for an Uncertain World, which if you can get that would be great, because he does predict a lot of things that have and are happening about how leaders need to adapt their own leadership skills and upgrade their leadership skills. But the VUCA Prime can be a great way of simply simplifying what you need to focus on. And so I'm going to go through what this VUCA Prime is. It's going to use the same 4 letters to describe the solution. And this is the how to lead in a VUCA world. So let's start off with the V. That now stands for vision. So the volatility can be countered with vision. And that's because vision is even more vital in turbulent times. And so when we're talking about vision, we are talking about, as a business leader, to have a clear vision for the company. And you've heard me talk about this. A good purpose and a vision is essential. And in the VUCA world, it's even more essential. Leaders with a clear vision of where they want their organization to be in the next 3-5 years can better weather the volatility, environmental changes, such as economic downturns or new competition in the market, or different things that are happening. Because it's the more of the vision of where you want to go, then you begin to start to figure out how to get there despite some of these challenges, because it's the vision that gets embedded in the minds of the people in your organization. So vision means having a clear intent, a clear direction for your actions. Vision seeks to create a future, not just to study the future. And I think that's an important part, where the vision of your company, if it is, linking it to some of the things that we've mentioned in previous episodes about having a noble cause. You see, this is the reason why businesses that have a noble cause, that are truly have an ambition to try and impact people's lives, that their products and services somehow is making the world a better place. That's what people want to be part of. So it's not just studying the future, it's creating a future based on what you want your business to add something. And that's the human thing. And no matter what's going on, people will still want to do that. So with a clear vision, you can then create this open space. You can create innovation. It helps people to feel creative, to still feel that they are empowered to do something. A bold vision sees beyond the volatility. And so with a kind of calm perspective, you can begin to lead based on your vision despite some of this volatility that might be going on. So just to reiterate, the company vision is what you would need to have in place. This is a vivid way of communicating what your business is all about. And it should be inspiring. It should be something that others can understand. Different leaders within the organization can also buy into. So it's the counter to the volatility, and it's to ensure that anybody in your organization isn't confused about where and what this company is all about. So it starts off with vision. The second is understanding. So you're moving from uncertainty, and could be countered by understanding. And this is where as a leader, it's having that ability to be able to stop, to look and listen. If you're going to survive in this VUCA world, you need to be effective in a VUCA environment by your understanding of what's going on. And the only way you can do that is by listening, learning. And this is one of the things that I have seen, and this is the reason, by the way, why this VUCA came up from the army, was because in the army there was a lot of hierarchical, and the US Army was very hierarchical, and so the generals and the top leaders didn't understand what was going on the front line. The communication wasn't to and fro, and so they were making decisions without the relevant information. So when we talk about understanding, it's about listening, understanding, and this is what is going to build the trust. And you must, as a leader, now learn from anybody. You must make sure that you're not too quick to judge, not too quick to dismiss people's opinions, no matter who they are, because it's those people on the front line that are going to see what's coming next. They sometimes will be the ones to be able to help you understand the next area of focus. So the VUCA world creates an urgency, yes, to act quickly, but sometimes it's a false sense of urgency. And so the best leaders have to have that calm presence, to be able to listen, to be able to not speak first, and sometimes allow people to share what's really going on so you can take that all in order for you to understand the world that you are in. And no matter what industry you might be, you might need to listen. Take time to go out with the frontline people. If it's the salespeople, maybe go on some meetings with them to know what's really going on. If you've been in that domain for a long time, you perhaps won't understand how quickly things have changed. And so your paradigm is different from the real paradigm, and you can only do that by understanding what's really going on in their world. The third is clarity. So we're moving from complexity to be countered with clarity, the deliberate process to make sense of the chaos. So in a VUCA world, chaos comes swift and hard. Leaders who can quickly and clearly tune into all the minutiae that's associated with this chaos can make better and more informed business decisions. And so leaders must help others make sense of this complexity by creating clarity. And typically, what one would say that always boil it down to just a few things, because the VUCA world rewards clarity because people are so confused that they grasp at anything that helps them make sense or out of this chaos. And so even me doing this podcast, I want to just try and make it simple. 4 things to focus on. That's the kind of clarity you want. Is that, am I clear? What am I focusing right now? And we could talk about some practicalities around that later on. But I think just providing that clarity is important. Then the last one is agility. We're moving from ambiguity, and that can be countered with agility. And this is the ability to communicate across the organization and to move quickly to apply solutions. And it's that whole idea that everybody has to start making decisions, equipping people with the ability to make decisions. In fact, the question for the US Army was, why were the terrorists winning the war? And the answer is that they empowered everyone to be a leader. And that meant that the frontline soldiers were empowered to make decisions, to rapidly move, to make decisions on their own because they knew what the vision was. You get it? And so this agility is so important. In an ambiguous world, leaders must be ready for surprises, and leaders can't surrender to ambiguity because that would lead to paralysis and confusion. So leaders must learn how to be agile. And I know we use that word a lot, but it is about, on a daily and weekly basis, knowing the needles to move and not being too late. And unfortunately, that becomes a challenge for organizations that are very hierarchical and need permission, and haven't empowered their people. And that's the reason why this has become a big need for many companies to become agile. So there you have it. Vision. We've talked about understanding. We talked about clarity. Talked about agility, and that's the counter. So the question is, do you agree that we are living in a VUCA world? If your answer is yes, then how are you doing in these 4 areas with vision? Do you have a clear vision for your company that gets communicated and it can be easily articulated? Do you have a means of understanding what's going on in your industry, from your competitors, from your customers, from your community with clarity? Are you keeping things clear and concise? As I would encourage, an organization should only be focusing on 3 big ticket items at one time. And then agility, how flexible are you to be able to adapt to the day-to-day changes that are happening in our world today? So vision, understanding, clarity, and agility are the ways of how you counter this VUCA world that is, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what are you going to do to move forward? Well, as I wrap up, I want to mention that the VUCA is here to stay, and the more we can learn how to adapt and create an organization where everybody is clear on what the goals are, that's how we can do that. So you'll find that companies that have clear goals and have daily or weekly huddles to talk about that, those are going to be the ones that are going to survive, because they can adapt to the changes that are happening on a daily, weekly basis. But I'm going to go one step further and say it actually starts with each individual. It starts with each individual having a daily focus plan, and that's actually out of that workshop or the module that I did. That's how I came up with the 5 daily habits, because I realized that actually it starts with each individual having at least a way of being that flexible as an individual leader. And that's where I came up with the 5 daily habits: think, plan, do, reflect, and learn. And that was created for the leader in the VUCA world. And you can download the template at businessleaderscoach.com/5DH, or you can go to the show notes of this episode at businessleaderscoach/podcast. And you can see it there and just download that. It's a simple template just to help you understand that if you're thinking, if you're planning, if you're then executing on that, and if you're reflecting, and then if you are finding out what you are learning that day, then you are dealing with your VUCA world. So I hope that that's helped, and I look forward to expounding on this, since this is the world that we're now in. There are other things that we can add to this, but for now, I'll leave it here. This is Toyo Shimbi for Business Leaders Coach, signing off, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.